And so, thank you, Vera. And so leading the training will be Shalini Kannan, Virgilio Cuasay, and Irvin Tang. Take it away, guys.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Conservancy's Grant Basic Training. My name is Irvin, and today Virgilio, Shalini, and I will lead the training on Explore the Coast grants. Next slide. So during this training, please feel free to use the chat to ask any questions that come up. For returning grantees, you can use this as a time to share your experience and tips on managing ETC grants. We will have a question and answer session at the end, but we'll also try to answer any questions that come up as during the presentation as well. Next slide. So this right here outlines the steps and workflow of an Explore the Coast grant. During this presentation, we will go over each of these steps and highlight the key components of each of these parts. Next slide. So first, we have the grant agreements. So the grant agreements outlines the terms and condition of the grant. So it is a contract, so it's legally binding, and any formal changes will need an amendment. There are three important dates to pay attention to. The first one is the work completion dates. So no work can be paid for after the work completion dates. So that is when most of the work, all of the work needs to be completed by for your grants. The second one is a final request for disbursement submittal dates. This is the final, when you can finally, the last day that you can bill your grant. So this is 1 month after the work completion dates. And lastly, we have the grant termination date. And this is the day that your grant legally expires, and that is 3 months after the completion date. The grant agreement will come with a 5-digit agreement number, and that number will be used for invoicing and other documents. So the question here is, do you also need a notice to proceed? Yeah, that is going to be the next slide. So notice to proceed, the conditions precedent to disbursement. So after all the condition precedents to disbursements are met, that is when you will receive a notice to proceed. So under the conditions precedents to disbursements, there is the grantee board resolution, where the grantee's board authorizes a designated person to follow the Conservancy's grant requirements and execute the project. Next, there is the work program, which Virgilio will go over in detail, but a brief summary. There are 3 main parts to a work program. The first is the project budget. The second is the subcontractor, and the third is plan for acknowledgement. Lastly, under the conditions precedent to disbursements, grantees will need to provide a proof of insurance policy and permits if necessary. Since most Explore the Coast projects are coastal recreation projects, permits are usually not required. So just submitting and a proof of insurance policy is all that's necessary. I do want to highlight here that in the red box, that is for filling out the insurance policy to make sure that the certificate holder is the State Coastal Conservancy. Right, next slide. So after all the conditions, all the terms of the conditions precedents are met, you will receive an approval letter, and this is the notice to proceed, and that is when you can start your project. Now I will pass it off to Virgilio, who will go over the work program in detail.
Thanks, Irvin. So the work program is part of the conditions precedent from your grant agreement, and it serves 2 main purposes. The first of which is to work alongside the grant agreement to guide your project towards completion. The second is to establish the project's budget and schedule. The key here is to keep things simple. You want enough detail to give folks information they need to review your work, but not so much that it takes them a long time to find the information they need. And it'll also hamper you if you need to frequently make changes to your project. Edits, you'll need to work with your project manager to apply edits or amendments to your work program, and just contact them when you need to do so. And a link to the work program template can be found in the grantee manual. Next slide, please. So the first part of the work program is project description, and it's really just a high-level summary of your project, stating its goals and what will be done to achieve them. You can't really read it too clearly here, but the first part of this paragraph is the goal, and then the last part of the paragraph are steps towards that goal. Next slide, please. The next section is the scope of work. This is a section where you'll describe your project in task form. So for each task, you'll provide a short narrative summary containing important details. You'll also state deliverables for each task, which you can think of as tangible work products. For instance, if an outcome of a task is to train 5 camp instructors, then a good deliverable for that would be a camp instructor roster. Tasks can be important events of your project, like day trips, but they can also be specific expenses like transportation. Work with your project manager to come up with the best approach. And in this example, you see, this scope of work without a narrative and just kind of laying things out in bullet form. If you can advance, please. And then this example here shows a narrative of the task and the work products or deliverables underneath. Next slide. The next section is the schedule, and this is really your scope of work adapted into table format, and it's going to show your task number, task title, the deliverables associated with each task, as well as the duration. Next slide. So the budget overview is a table that outlines the costs, or rather the budget of your project. It's one of the most important parts of your program because it's going to be used by our contracts department to review your invoices, make sure you stay on budget. And please note that we'd like for you to insert line items for food, transportation, subcontractors, indirect costs, and fiscal sponsorship fees if you're using a fiscal sponsor. And you can see that in this example here. I've set subtasks for food and transportation, and a separate line item for fiscal sponsorship fee. Next slide. Next slide, Mean. So this is the budget details section, and this is where you're going to list out your direct costs, travel costs, and direct costs. It's really just an explanation for any expenditures you're going to make. For labor costs, we'd like you to list staff titles and names, but don't list out the pay rates. And please note that all organizations that receive funding from the Conservancy are required to meet strict accounting standards. So while rare, there's always a possibility of an audit. So we advise our grantees to use Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, or GAAP. Next slide, please. The next section is direct costs, and what direct costs are the project-specific costs related to carrying out your project. They include labor costs for project management and implementation, project-specific materials and equipment, subcontractors, so on and so forth. So as far as materials and equipment go, they're project-specific materials and equipment, things like tents, surfboards, maps, things of that sort. Fiscal sponsorship fee, if you'll be using one, and travel. Next slide, please. You'll also want to talk about whether or not you're going to be billing indirect costs, and what indirect costs are non-specific, non-project specific costs of doing business, aka overhead. And these are things like rent or utility bills or general purpose equipment such as computers. You're allowed to bill up to 20% of your grant total, but you should really work with an accountant to determine this rate, as you're expected to keep details or detailed records of your expenses should an audit occur. Next slide. If you'll be using subcontractors, please list them out and state the name, qualifications, and brief scope of work. And examples of subcontractors are bus companies, kayaking instructors, and community partners. Next slide. And then the last section of your work program is the plan for acknowledgement. And this also happens to be a grant agreement requirement. And so the Conservancy would simply like to be acknowledged in your organization's communications or announcements when talking about your ETC project. And some examples of acknowledgement are social media posts, website announcements, press releases, program brochures, and even participant sign-up sheets. Any chance that you're going to be engaging the public would be an opportunity to acknowledge us. And next slide, please. And that's pretty much it. You can start work once you've satisfied all your conditions precedent, including the work program.
And so after you start working on your program, the next logical question might be, how do I get paid? So typically, Coastal Conservancy grants are all on a reimbursement basis. So you'll spend the money out of your budget and then invoice us for the actual costs paid, and we will reimburse you. And the process for this, you submit invoices, and we require that grantees submit invoices at least quarterly and at most monthly. So that's like 4 to 12 invoices per month. We don't have a set schedule like some grantors, so you can work on a schedule that works for you and talk to your project manager if you need any assistance making that schedule. And an invoice consists of 3 important things that I'll go over in more detail soon. And that's 1, the RFD or request for disbursement form. 2, a progress report that explains the progress you've achieved on your project in the billing period. And 3rd is backup documentation to show proof that you've spent the money that you've spent. So that's like receipts and invoices, that kind of thing. And when you want to submit an invoice, you combine these 3 documents in this order: RFD, progress report, backup documentation, into a single PDF, and then submit it by email to invoices@scc.ca.gov. And always CC your project manager. That way your project manager can make sure they're keeping track of everything too, and can help flag it to our contract staff in case it gets missed. And also, we are a bit old school. We're the government, and we still require you to mail in a hard copy. So after you've submitted your invoice via email, you can submit a hard copy to our offices, and the address is there. It's also in our instructions for invoicing on our website, which has been linked in the chat. I'll go over the progress report first. And for Explore the Coast grants, in your grant agreement as an attachment, there's a template for your progress report. There's a separate template for a final progress report, which is a bit different, just requires a little bit more detail. And you can also ask your project manager. If you ever can't find certain forms, please email your project manager. We're happy to help you find it. And what this report consists of is just an update on your project's progress, any challenges and successes that have occurred in the billing period. And there's some optional elements, including survey results and pictures and stories. We love having these things, but they are optional. Here's just some screenshots of the progress report template. And this top section is just information about yourself and your grant. And then part 1 includes those summary sections. And some grantees write us like a really long narrative report. And if you're already writing that for other grantors, sure, feel free to submit it, but you can also keep it really simple, make it easy on yourselves, and give us like bullet points of like what happened. And section B here is like a breakdown by task. So how you've laid out your tasks in your work program, you'll also just update us like what was accomplished under each task. So you can make it as simple as you'd like, or as complex as you'd like. And you also have to provide an update on an estimate of your participants served and that you've been acknowledging conservancy funding in your program. And the second page has the optional elements like photos, impact stories, and survey results. If you do surveys, we request that you include some of these questions if there's the opportunity, but again, optional. And if you are submitting survey results, we really appreciate if you provide a summary of the results rather than a copy of every single survey. But if that's not in your workflow, send us what you have. That's fine too. Next, I'll go over the request for disbursement form. So this is screenshots of the form. You can find it on our website in Excel and PDF formats. And I'll go into detail on each of these pages. On the first page is a summary of the expenses that you have paid during the billing period. And some important sections are marked in red here. The work plan, task number, and name and budget sections here, those need to match your work program that's been approved already, that Virgilio went over. So all the numbers, names, and budget should match your work program in these 2 columns on the left. Then in the third column, you break down by each task how much you've spent in this billing period. In the fourth column, you total this billing period's costs plus the past billing period's costs under each task. So it's like a total of your budget under each task to date. And then the final column populates itself with the remaining balance. This breaking it all down by task keeps it like easy for our contract staff to review your work program and your invoice and make sure that we all make sure that you're spending according to the budget that you've laid out in the work program. Another section down here, you'll notice there's a less 5% or 10% withhold. So for Explore the Coast grants, we have a typical withholding of 5%, which means we'll pay back what you invoice for minus 5%. And at the end of your project, when it's completed to satisfaction, then we return the 5%. So if it's your final invoice, you check this box here and we'll return that final 5%. The second page of the RFD breaks down the expenses listed on page 1, and it's broken down into different categories. A is materials and equipment, B is labor, C is indirect costs, and D is subcontractors. And there's a column for receipt and invoice and number, and you can either use numbers that are already on the receipts, or you can just write in a number on top of each receipt. That just makes it easy for us to connect the dots between this and the backup documentation you're going to provide. So you break down your costs here. The only section that you don't need that same backup documentation for is labor. So the labor section's a little different because you'll write the job title and number of hours worked in this first column here. and then the hourly rate of that staff person or that role in the second column, and then you multiply for the total here. So though we don't require you to submit the timesheets or anything, we are expecting that your organizations has a record of your personnel costs and how you pay people. That's pretty typical. And like Virgilio mentioned, it's rare, but there's a chance you could get audited. So we do expect that you're keeping those records on your end, though we don't ask for them for labor here. And section C, indirect cost, that again, that percentage must match what's approved in your work program. And so the third element of the invoice, we've got the progress report, the RFD, and now the backup documentation. And so basically we need receipts and invoices that show that you have paid for the expenses that you're requesting reimbursement for. They should be paid receipts. Sometimes you might get an invoice, but it says that the money is due. That's not good enough. Sorry, we need to see that it's been paid. So the way you can do that, if it's an online purchase, when it says shipped, that's the one that shows us that the expense has been paid. And you can provide pictures or scans of receipts. And sometimes when people have lost or misplaced receipts, they try to send us their bank statements to show that they've paid for something, but unfortunately, we can't accept that. So please remember to save your receipts. Another category of materials and equipment costs is travel costs. And for car travel, there's kind of two ways that we can pay it. One is the government approved personal vehicle mileage reimbursement rate. And that varies from year to year. And the current rate is $0.625. And when you want to use this rate, you need to provide a travel record. So this table at the bottom is an example of a grantee's travel record that they submitted. And the key parts are marked in red here. It should show a date, the start and end destinations, or to and from here, number of miles, and then the amount. So that's the mileage multiplied by the approved mileage rate. That's the amount. And the other thing we can do, if you are using a rental car, for example, or something like that, we can pay for gas as long as you provide the receipt and again, provide a travel record of where you went and why it took that much gas, I guess. And then rental cars like gig car, for example, since that includes the gas in the rental fee, you can't pay, like basically no double dipping. If we're reimbursing your gig car, we can't reimburse gas in addition. We can also pay bus rental and transportation. So this is an example of an invoice that was paid from for a bus rental through a school. We can also pay parking fees and tolls. So this was a parking fee ticket that was scanned and provided as backup documentation. The other section is subcontractors. And as a reminder, subcontractors are other people or organizations that you pay to complete a service for you. And you can provide their invoices as backup. And some examples that might be relevant for you are if you hire a specialized tour operator to take you on a certain tour and they invoice you, or maybe you work with partner organizations who take your participants on a day trip and you pay them for that. Or if there's like project related accounting or technical assistance, like one grantee used a subcontractor for summer camp evaluation, that is acceptable also. And subcontractors should be approved in your work program beforehand. So when you're filling out the work program, you'll see there's a section for subcontractors. And that is all for invoicing, and I'll pass it back to Virgilio for project completion.
Thanks, Shalini. So yeah, this is the point where you're ready to close out your project. You'll want to talk to your project manager to inform them that you're ready to do so. And they'll check to make sure that all your deliverables are submitted. Once you're given the go-ahead, you'll be asked to complete a final report. You submit that final report and request any, or you also submit any final billing and request disbursement of your withholding. And that concludes your project. And then, you know, for as far as resources go, you'll want to consult the grantee manual, which has links to all the documents you're going to need and outlines all the administrative processes related to a conservancy grant. You'll want to talk with your project manager whenever there's changes, any type of communications or updates, speak to your project manager. We also have a resources for grantees page on the Conservancy website, which has a lot of the same information that the grantee manual has. But yeah, talk to your project manager whenever you need help.
I think in the interest of time, we don't have much time for questions now, but I see that our staff has been answering a lot of questions in the chat. And we plan to have office hours from 4 to 4:30. So stick around for that. Well, all of this is optional, but that part is especially optional. And stick around to ask us more questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Shalini, Irvin, and Virgilio for doing that training. We're going to do a quick wrap up. Oh, did you have something? Did you guys have anything else you wanted to add before we move on?
Nope, that's good.
Okay, great. So I think we're going to move on now. We have a fun little wrap up activity. Thank you all for your patience today and hanging in, and hopefully this was very helpful for you. So Carol Martinez is going to put in the chat a link to our poll everywhere and some instructions for how to access that activity. You can either navigate to the web page that is put in the chat, or you can text SCC, like our organization, 068 to 22333. There will be some prompts there for you to fill out, and we'll get to see some of the answers as they come up on the screen. I also wanted to flag again the office hours that will, the optional office hours that will continue after